let's be real. If you've ever been involved in sales, you've hit this wall, you have a conversation, feels really promising,
Hmm.
the prospect seems totally engaged. They're nodding, maybe even saying things like, oh, this sounds perfect for us, or yeah, definitely something we need to do.
Right.
And then crickets. Just absolute silence. You've been
Wow.
ghosted. It's more than annoying, it's genuinely frustrating, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is. And it's like an almost universal pain point in the sales world. That whole feeling of putting in the time, the effort, thinking you're really connecting,
Yeah.
only for the whole thing to just evaporate. Poof.
Exactly. Poof is right. And that's why we're doing a deep dive today into some really interesting source material that tackles this head on.
Okay.
We've got excerpts from a webinar features Justine Tyndall from Sandler Training, and the whole focus is on understanding and, crucially, stopping that ghosting thing in sales.
Right. So the goal here in this deep dive isn't just to vent about being ghosted, but to actually unpack why the source suggests it happens. We want to dig into those root causes and then, look at the concrete, actionable strategies,
Mm-hmm.
the tools that Sandler actually outlines for preventing it, stopping it before it even gets to that point.
And the really interesting angle right from the start, according to this source, ghosting itself, it's actually not the problem.
Okay.
It's presented more as a symptom.
Mhm.
And the source argues that often the cure means looking less at, what the prospect did or didn't do,
Mhm.
and more at, well, your own process as the salesperson.
Ah, okay. That's the shift then. It's moving from why they ghost me to something more like what happened in my process that kind of allowed them to ghost.
Exactly. So the source talks about that scenario. We all know you have what felt like a good interaction. You ask questions, the prospect said all the right things, definitely doing this, sounds great.
Been there.
But then they just sort of avoid moving forward. They disappear.
And naturally, when that happens, the salespeople on the webinar, they shared all the usual reasons they think are behind it.
Mm.
The prospect got swamped. Maybe the price scared them off. Perhaps the expectations weren't quite nailed down.
Or maybe some decision maker changed jobs, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. All those usual suspects.
And those sound pretty logical when you're sitting there wondering what went wrong, don't they?
They really do.
Mm.
And look, sometimes those things are factors. But the core argument from the source is pretty firm. Ghosting is a problem, sure, but it's a symptom. It signals a deeper breakdown much earlier in the actual sales conversation.
Okay, so where does that breakdown usually start, according to the source material?
Well, it points quite strongly towards issues in the salesperson's effectiveness. The source uses insights from these sales competency assessments,
Right.
and these assessments consistently show common gaps, common areas where salespeople aren't as effective as they could be, which makes ghosting way more likely.
What kind of specific gaps are we talking about here?
So several key ones get highlighted. Um, Not being truly effective at qualifying the opportunity, like really digging in.
Okay.
Struggling with controlling the sales process, so maybe letting the prospect dictate everything. Lack of questioning effectiveness, asking the right, maybe tough questions at the right times.
Mm-hmm.
Prospecting actually comes up too, mentioned as a major gap for a lot of teams in the data they shared. And finally, difficulty with emotional detachment, getting too wrapped up in one particular deal.
Ah, okay. So if you're not really solid on those fundamentals, like if you don't truly know if there's a real urgent need or if they can actually make a decision, or if you're just letting the prospect kind of wander off wherever they want,
Yeah.
then it sounds like you're basically setting the stage for them to eventually just fade away, ghost you.
That's precisely the argument the source makes.
Yeah.
These gaps create the perfect conditions for what they call a predictable and ultimately pretty problematic buyer-seller dance.
Okay, the dance. I like that metaphor. How does the source describe this typical seller system that kind of sets up this awkward dance?
Well, it probably looks familiar. It often starts with a, pretty quick needs analysis.
Yeah, yeah.
Then you jump fairly quickly into presenting your solution or sending a proposal.
Right.
After that, you try to close, maybe you handle an objection or two,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get into that potentially endless cycle of following up.
Yes. The just checking in emails start piling up.
Exactly. Now, here's where it gets fascinating. The source points out that this standard seller process, it actually aligns perfectly with a common, maybe subconscious, hidden agenda on the prospect side.
A hidden agenda. What does that look like from the prospect's chair?
Well, in this dance, particularly when the salesperson isn't really leading, The prospect steps might look something like this. First, express some initial interest, get the conversation going.
Okay.
Then, act motivated, seem engaged, mostly to get free information. Your quote, maybe your proposal, definitely insights into how you'd solve their problem.
So they're just trying to pick your brain, get some free consulting, basically.
Often, yeah, that's a big part of it. They get the valuable intel or pricing they were after,
Hmm.
maybe use it internally or compare it elsewhere, and then they just avoid committing. They disappear.
Wow.
They got what they needed without ever having to say no or invest anything more than a bit of time on a call.
So the way many people sell actually makes it easy for the prospect to just extract value and then vanish.
It creates what the source calls mutual mystification. Think about a real dance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only one person can really lead effectively.
Mm-hmm.
If the prospect ends up leading the sales conversation, setting the agenda, controlling the pace, deciding which questions get answered, then nobody's truly clear on the other person's real intentions or what's supposed to happen next.
Okay.
And that lack of a clear shared path forward, that's exactly where deals stall and ghosting happens.
Okay, so if the salesperson isn't leading effectively and you get this mutual mystification, what are the specific qualification failures the source points to as direct causes of ghosting?
Yeah, the source gets really specific here. It details several key breakdowns. First, not uncovering the real impact of the prospect's problem.
Impact.
Meaning it's not enough just to know they have a problem.
Hmm?
You absolutely have to quantify it. What's it costing them in dollars, in metrics? What's the actual pain?
Right.
If the prospect doesn't feel that urgency tied to a real cost of doing nothing,
Then there's no real reason for them to act now.
exactly. Little motivation to invest the time, the resources to fix it now. Second big one, not confirming the prospect's willingness and ability to solve the problem right now.
Ah.
They might agree they have the problem. They might even see the cost, but are they actually ready, able, and willing to commit the money, the time, the effort today? Just acknowledging pain doesn't make them a qualified buyer.
That's a really important distinction. They feel the pain, but maybe they can't afford the cure or they're just not ready to take it yet.
Precisely. Third, failing to build enough trust or rapport. If you haven't positioned yourself as someone they trust, like a genuine advisor, if they feel uncomfortable or lack confidence in you,
They won't want to have the awkward no conversation.
right, ghosting feels easier, less confrontational for them.
Yeah.
It's like the path of least resistance.
Awkward social exit.
You got it. Fourth, leaving the next steps unclear or loose. Not mutually agreed upon, the source really hammers the need for a clear next steps agreement. If it's vague like, I'll send you info, or let's touch base next week, or the dreaded think it over,
Yeah.
there's no real commitment there from either side. It's super easy for the prospect to just let it drop.
There's no defined path that both people feel they need to stick to.
No accountability. Fifth, inadequate qualification of the prospect's investment. And the source defines investment really broadly here.
Okay.
It's not just about the money. It's also their ability, their capacity, and their willingness to commit the necessary time, people, resources, even internal political capital. Do they have the budget and the bandwidth and the genuine desire to actually see this through?
So it's like, do they have the cash and the internal champions and the people free to actually make it happen?
Exactly. All of it. And finally, number 6, not fully understanding the prospect's decision process. This is huge. It means identifying everyone involved, understanding their specific roles. Who's the champion? Who's the influencer? Who actually signs off? Is there a potential blocker? And mapping out the actual timeline for each step needed between now and getting it done.
If you don't know the players and the playbook.
You can't navigate the internal landscape.
Right.
The deal just stalls out in limbo, and then silence.
Listing those out, it really highlights how many common ghosting situations probably stem from places where the salesperson could have asked more, been clearer, taken more control.
Exactly.
It's not about assigning blame, but identifying specific fixable gaps in skills or process.
That's the powerful part. These aren't just random events. They're often the result of breakdowns in the process. And that leads us right into the Sandler methodology's prevention plan. It's all about building a structure to avoid these pitfalls in the first place.
Okay, the prevention plan. Let's hear it. What are the core Sandler tools the source highlights for stopping ghosting before it even starts?
Okay, so the source really zooms in on 3 key tools. The first one is basically non-negotiable. The upfront contract.
The upfront contract. Okay, what makes that so critical?
It's defined as a verbal mutual agreement that you set up right at the very beginning of any interaction, like the first minute of a cold call, the start of a scheduled meeting. The rule is basically don't talk shop until you have this agreement.
So you're setting the ground rules for the conversation right away?
Precisely. You agree on the essential components.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose. Why are we actually talking today? The time. How long do we realistically have?
Yeah.
The agenda. What specific things should we cover? Who's asking questions? And critically, the possible outcomes. How could this conversation realistically end? What are the options?
This source had that great example, didn't it, with Justine talking to Dinesh, and they explicitly agreed that the meeting can only end one of two ways. Either they decide to book a next step, or they decide not to proceed.
Yes, that example nails it. By getting that clear verbal agreement on binary outcomes up front, you kill that mutual mystification we talked about.
Right.
Both people know exactly what a successful outcome for this specific interaction looks like. It makes it way harder for the prospect to just vanish because you already agreed on what happens instead of vanishing.
Okay, so that vague, I'll think about it, kind of disappears because you agreed up front on the real potential endings.
Exactly. It builds in accountability for what comes next, whatever that next step is, even if it's agreeing not to move forward. Okay, the second tool. Equal Business Stature, EBS.
Equal business stature. Sounds like acting like peers. Not talking down, but not being subservient either.
That's the essence of it. You interact as a peer. You're respectful of their position, absolutely, but you approach the conversation with confidence. Not desperately trying to please, not acting like you need the deal.
And why is that confidence, that peer-level interaction, so important?
Well, the source explains that having EBS empowers you, the salesperson, to ask those necessary, sometimes slightly uncomfortable, qualification questions.
Yeah.
It lets you control the process respectfully. It reframes the whole interaction. You're both there to see if there's a mutual fit, if there's value for both sides, not just for them to judge you.
Okay.
This mindset reduces that feeling of desperation, positions you as an advisor, and honestly, it helps manage your own anxiety when you're talking to senior people.
So it's about mutual respect, both sides figuring out, is this worthwhile, rather than just the prospect holding all the cards.
You got it.
Oh.
Okay. Third key tool, the post-sell.
The post-sell. Wait, you do something after they seem to agree or say yes to a next step? Isn't that risky?
Huh. It might sound counterintuitive, right?
Right.
But the source explains that it involved asking very specific, sort of confirming, maybe even slightly challenging questions after the prospect has indicated agreement or seems positive about moving forward.
Like what kind of questions?
Examples from the source were things like, okay, great, so what could potentially change between now and our next meeting that might derail this? Or just thinking ahead, are there any other people involved who might have some reservations we haven't talked about?
Huh. Why intentionally poke the bear after things seem good?
Because, as the source puts it, your effectiveness comes from the quality of information you get, not just the information you give.
Mm-hmm.
The post-sell is designed to proactively surface any lingering doubts, any hidden objections, any potential roadblocks while you still have them there to talk about it.
Ah, okay. Better to hear about a potential issue now than have it silently kill the deal later.
Exactly. You're trying to get ahead of the very things that might cause them to ghost you down the line. It's a final check for real alignment, uncovering the things left unsaid.
Okay, that makes sense. You're stress testing the agreement.
Kind of, yeah. And these three tools in the upfront contract, equal business stature, and the post-sell, they all fit into this larger framework the source calls the Sandler Success Triangle.
The triangle. Okay, what are the three sides or corners?
So the three essential pillars for any successful salesperson, according to this model, are behavior, that's your consistent activity, making calls, prospecting, setting meetings. Attitude, your mindset, your beliefs. Confidence, being resilient, not being needy. And technique, knowing what to say and how to say it, using the specific tools like upfront contracts, DBS, post-sell.
And the source is clear. You need all three. They have to be balanced.
Absolutely critical. Like a three-legged stool, neglect one leg and the whole thing topples over.
Right.
The source even prompts you to think, which leg do you tend to lean on most? Maybe you're great at behavior, you make tons of calls, and you have a good attitude, but if your technique is weak,
If you don't know what to actually say or do in the conversation.
right, if you can't control the call or qualify properly, you'll still struggle. You'll still get ghosted, just like the example they mentioned in the webinar.
So just being busy and positive isn't enough if the actual interaction skills aren't there.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the source also touches briefly on how data, like from those sales competency assessments they showed,
Huh?
how that data is really vital.
To pinpoint which leg is wobbly or what specific skill needs work.
Exactly. It gets you past just guessing why someone's struggling. The assessments can identify the root cause to the tall. Maybe it's anxiety talking about money. Maybe it's a blind spot in qualifying decision makers. Maybe it's difficulty maintaining control. The source used a great analogy. A doctor needs a diagnosis before prescribing medicine.
Mm-hmm.
This targeted data makes sure that any training or coaching actually hits the real problem, so companies aren't wasting time and money on generic stuff that doesn't fix the underlying issue.
It definitely sounds like a more structured, almost scientific way to tackle sales improvement and something like ghosting.
It really is. It shifts the focus from just feeling frustrated about ghosting to having a clear, data-informed process for developing skills and preventing it.
Okay, so let's try and pull all this together then. The big picture, ghosting. It's a symptom, not the core illness.
Right.
It usually points back to breakdowns earlier in the sales process itself, often related to weak qualification, not controlling the conversation effectively, maybe not asking the tough questions.
And the solution, or at least the prevention plan highlighted in the source, involves using specific, structured techniques like that upfront contract to get clarity and commitment right from the start,
Mm-hmm.
maintaining equal business stature so you can engage confidently as a peer and control the flow,
Right.
and using the post-sell to proactively dig for those potential deal killers before they have a chance to fester.
And all of this rests on that success triangle idea, needing that balance of consistent behavior, the right attitude, and the specific techniques, with data helping you figure out where you need to focus.
Yeah, it really reframes the whole ghosting issue. It moves it away from blaming prospects or outside factors and puts the focus squarely onto mastering a professional, repeatable sales process designed to stop ghosting conditions from even developing.
Which kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? Something the source touched on regarding all the digital communication we have now. It makes you wonder. In a world that's so saturated with email, texting, Slack, you name it, are you, listening now, investing enough time and effort in honing those fundamental person-to-person interaction skills?
Mhm.
You know, the ability to confidently ask direct questions, to really listen, to professionally guide and control the flow of a live conversation. Because this source argues those skills are absolutely critical, not just for preventing ghosting, but for actually driving real revenue.
Yeah, it's a great question to reflect on. Maybe think about which of those techniques we discussed, the upfront contract, EBS, the post-sell, which one might give you the biggest lift if you practiced it this week? What would it actually look like to bring just one of those into your next sales conversation more intentionally?
Think about that last time you got ghosted after a call that felt good. What questions maybe didn't you ask? What agreements didn't you get? The answers might just be sitting right there, showing you the path to stopping it happening again.